Very much. Good evening, colleagues and friends. Welcome to this webinar. On behalf of the South African Pharmacy Council, I'm honored to officially open this Pharmacy Month launch webinar, organized in collaboration with our partners, the National Department of Health, the Independent Community Pharmacy Association, and the Pharmaceutical Society of South Africa. This year's theme is Think Pharmacy. Think health, think pharmacy, one profession, many roles. It serves as a strong reminder of how much pharmacy professional contributes to our nation's health. It doesn't matter whether you are in community pharmacy, hospital pharmacy, research, education, regulation, or industry. We remain one profession, united in purpose and serving in many capacities. So tonight, we now will offer a glimpse into that remarkable range of services and explain why pharmacies are often the first and sometimes the most trusted point of care in our healthcare. Over the next hour, we will go behind the scenes, look at the depth and the diversity of our work, and hopefully you will leave with a renewed sense of appreciation for the value that the pharmacy brings to our nation's health and well-being. So whether you are a pharmacist or a student, a healthcare partner, or a member of public, thank you for joining the webinars. Tonight, throughout and through the month of September, we celebrate our profession, highlight its many facets, and remind everyone when you think health, think pharmacy. Thank you. If I was good in many tongues, I will probably speak in many tongues of our nation and say, Rea leboha, siyakenza, ro leboha, bayadangi, and we look forward to a good webinar. Siyabonga. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. Thank you to Mr. Tlala for that wonderful welcome. Our first speaker for tonight is Prof. Natalie Shellack. She's the head of the Department of Pharmacology at the University of Pretoria. She has worked in the fields of antimicrobial stewardship and clinical pharmacy services. Her research has centered around researching different strategies to either investigate innovative ways to answer data, human resource, or behavioral questions to assist in developing strategies for antimicrobial stewardship. Her efforts are particularly focused on low and middle income countries. She has been an advocate for clinical pharmacy practice, structuring research projects that provide evidence that clinical pharmacists improve patient safety, optimize medicine, and are vital members of the antimicrobial stewardship framework. She's a co-founding member of the South African Society of Clinical Pharmacists, editor of the South African Pharmaceutical Journal, and serves as an elected councillor on the South African Pharmacy Council, serving as chair of the Education Committee. And she will talk to us tonight about the role of pharmacists in academia. Thank you, Prof. Natalie. We do apologize. We do seem to have a slight technical error. Just give us one moment, please. Okay, we do apologize. There seems to be some technical difficulty. We're quickly going to move to our second speaker first, and then we will come back to Prof. Natalie once we resolve the technical issues. So our second speaker for tonight we will now be the first, is Marlene Moonsamy. She's a distinguished graduate from the University of Witwatersrand, holding both a Bachelor of Pharmacy and an MSc Med Pharmacotherapy degree. Her career in the pharmaceutical industry began in 2008 as a GMP compliance pharmacist, and she subsequently transitioned to roles in quality assurance and regulatory affairs. Marlene's regulatory journey has seen her work with renowned multinational corporations such as Novartis, Johnson & Johnson, GlaxoSmithKline, Abbott Laboratories, and AstraZeneca, as well as locally with Adcock Ingram OTC. In her last 3 roles, she served as the head of regulatory affairs for sub-Saharan Africa. She has held positions in quality assurance as a responsible pharmacist and in regulatory affairs leadership across consumer OTC, pharma and biotechnology sectors for South Africa and the English, Portuguese, and French-speaking sub-Saharan African markets. Recently, Marlene founded her consulting company, Pharmacists Pty Limited, which offers compliance services to the pharmaceutical industry. She has also contributed to academia as an external lecturer at Wits University and was appointed as a member to the South African Association for Pharmacists and Industries Executive Committee for the 2025-2026 term. Throughout her career, Marlene has received numerous accolades, reflecting her adaptedness in navigating the complex regulatory affairs landscape and her excellence in leadership, strategic thinking, and solution delivery. Her ultimate vision is to enhance healthcare in Africa through education and empowerment in pharmacy. Thank you, Marlene, and she's going to discuss with us pharmacists in industry. Over to you.
Thank you, Andre. Good evening, colleagues. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Pharmacy Council, SAPI, PSSA, as well as ICPA for hosting this very important webinar. I would also like to thank SAPI for the opportunity to represent pharmacists in industry and to share with you the important roles that they play in the various functions. Next slide, please. Thank you. And throughout this presentation, you will see that we will be highlighting one profession and many roles. Next slide. So we do have quite an extensive agenda. However, we will focus on the key aspects tonight. We will start off with some introductory concepts and then move into the key functional aspects and end off with some take-home points. Next slide. So some of the key underlying principles under which the industry operates, the main reasons for them to be in existence is to ensure accessibility, availability, and affordability of medicines. And then we have strict standards to ensure that quality, safety, and efficacy is maintained for all our medicinal products. And to ensure this, we have good practices in place for every function. Ultimately, the responsible pharmacist has full oversight of all our compliance functions and therefore has the accountability to Pharmacy Council as well as to SAPRA to ensure that all of these standards are maintained. Next slide. This is just a snapshot of the various functions in industry, starting out with research and development, progressing then to the different steps in clinical trials with preclinical and clinical development, then moving on to regulatory affairs, which then leads to the rest of the life cycle of the product. Next slide. So these are the types of medicinal products which SAPRA focuses on and which the Medicines Act and the Pharmacy Act governs. Just to briefly touch on these products, new chemical entities are novel chemical entities which have not been previously registered in the country. Generics tend to kick in when the patents for new chemical entities have expired and they have proven bioequivalence to a specific reference innovator. Biologicals are derived from living organisms, and biosimilars are not identical to biologicals. However, they are similar in many aspects with no significant clinical differences. Complementary medicines, by their term, they tend to complement orthodox medicines and are usually from a natural origin. Medical devices, their mode of operation is usually a physical action as opposed to pharmacological action with the other types of medicines. With radiopharmaceuticals, this can be used through radioactive substances for both therapy and diagnoses. What's important to remember here is that the level of accessibility of these medicines to the public is determined by their safety profile. Next slide. So if we look at the product life cycle, I mentioned research and development initially. We move through the preclinical and the clinical stages to assess whether the product is feasible for registration. Once the product has been decided to go through the registration pathways, an application is submitted to the health authority, and once it's approved, the life cycle then begins. The product can be launched into the market, and then this is when various compliance activities become very important. Some licenses may be cancelled at some point in the future due to various reasons in compliance, commercial, or supply. Next slide. Thank you. So one of the key functions, key compliance functions, is quality assurance, and this involves our 5 Ps, which is namely our premises, product, people, procedures and processes, as well as partners, which is our third-party contractors. The purpose for quality assurance is to ensure that patient safety is maintained, that efficacy is maintained, and that we have regulatory compliance in line with the legislative requirements. And the manner in which this is done is by ensuring that we have quality management systems established, that we have written procedures in place, and that there are corrective and preventative actions for anything that might go wrong. We also ensure that staff are adequately trained for the roles that they will occupy, and that there are ongoing audits to ensure that compliance is maintained on an ongoing basis. So quality assurance sets the standard for how the other functions operate. Next slide. With clinical trials, their main purpose is to generate robust and adequate evidence for regulatory approval and to ensure that even after regulatory approval, the product can be used for patients. This is done through different clinical protocol developments, site selections, recruitment of participants in clinical studies, as well as data analyses. And as you can see, the underlying principles that are maintained are defined by good clinical practices. And again, this touches our 5 Ps, as I mentioned. Next slide. Then we come to regulatory affairs, which is one of the more exciting areas in the industry, in my opinion. Regulatory affairs, the main function is to obtain and maintain registration approvals and access to various markets. One of the key functions is to compile dossiers, respond to queries from health authorities, and to manage variations throughout the product lifecycle. Next slide. Another important compliance area is pharmacovigilance, which is also getting a lot of attention now. The main aspects of pharmacovigilance is to detect, assess, and prevent adverse drug reactions. And the manner in which this is done is through pharmacovigilance system management files, through individual case safety reporting, signal detection, and risk management plans for all marketed products. And again, we have good pharmacovigilance practices which govern what happens in this function. Then we move to manufacturing and packaging, which is also one of the key areas in the industry. And this is governed by good manufacturing practices, which are maintained throughout the production process. This is done to ensure that there is consistent product quality, consistent supply, as well as integrity even after the product reaches the market. And this is done by ensuring that we have validated processes in place, ensuring that all equipment is qualified, that we have adequate process controls, and that staff are trained on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. Quality control involves testing of materials as well as the product from the outset, so from the receipt of raw materials and right up until batch release before the medicine is released into the market, and then even stability testing after release into the market. And this is done through good laboratory practices in third-party labs as well as manufacturing labs and labs that are integrated with the manufacturing site. Next slide, please. Then we have supply chain and logistics. This involves the sourcing right from raw materials and right up until product delivery to the final stakeholders in the value chain. Their main purpose is to ensure uninterrupted supply of medicines to patients, and this is done through demand forecasting, through procurement and management of cold chain and transport systems. Again, here we have good distribution practices, again touching on the 5 Ps that I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So we have warehousing and distribution next, and you might wonder what is the difference. So warehousing and distribution becomes involved only after the product has been manufactured, and they are important to ensure that the product gets to the different sectors in our community pharmacies, our institutional pharmacies, as well as our wholesalers. One of their main responsibilities is to ensure traceability of the product and timely availability. And this is done through GDP standards and, in some cases, state-of-the-art tracking systems. Next slide. Another very important function is market access. Market access ensures equitable access of products, medicinal products, to all populations, regardless of their financial standing. So for the private sector, we ensure that pricing complies with the requirements of Department of Health, reimbursement by medical aids is established, and that government tenders are in place. Next slide, please. Marketing and sales has a very commercially driven function. Their main purpose is to drive product sales and revenue, increase the revenue, while also ensuring that they meet compliance requirements. And this is done through promotional campaigns, detailing, and where appropriate and allowed, sampling as well. They also ensure that medicines are channeled to patients via the correct routes. And then finally, we look at export. Export looks at expanding the reach of our products into other regions to meet the health needs in those markets. And this is done through export licenses, through certificates of free sale, and ultimately in alignment with the regulatory requirements of that market. Next slide. Some of the key take-home points that I'd like for you to remember is that, as I mentioned earlier on, this is a highly regulated environment governed by both the Medicines Act as well as the Pharmacy Act. It's very complex and very fast-paced. One small action can have vast consequences. This is something important to remember as well. Both compliance and commercial priorities are important, therefore they have to be balanced. Safety, quality, and efficacy standards are always top of mind to ensure that we keep the patient in focus. I'd like to also highlight that opportunities for pharmacists in industry are expanding because of our specialist knowledge, and therefore we are highly sought after. Also, our career path is dependent on each of our own efforts towards development. So while the opportunities are endless, the end goal is ours to determine. Next slide. So I'd like to close with some final key messages from the SARP team here. And I think one point is worth mentioning. We have a few points throughout the slide. The first one is just to remind all pharmacists that before you see the medicine on your pharmacy shelf, whether it's community pharmacy or institutional, please keep in mind that a pharmacist in industry has signed it off to make sure that it is safe, effective, and fit for use. And I think, judging from all that I've shared this evening, I think you will agree with me that pharmacists in industry hold a vital role in the healthcare system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. And I think everybody who's joined tonight who's not working in industry gained quite a bit of insight of how much opportunities there are in the industry sector. And I'm also laughing on the one hand because you said you enjoyed regulatory affairs, and I personally enjoyed quality assurance a lot more. So your personality will also determine which role within that sector will be ideal for you. So thank you very much. So we're going to move on to the hospital sector, to Mr. Bandela, and I will apologize sincerely, but I will not try and pronounce his surname because I know I will do it wrong, because I'm not sure how this is pronounced. But Bandela is a pharmacist, healthcare innovator, and social entrepreneur with over a decade of experience in hospital, retail, and clinical pharmacy. He currently serves as the pharmacy manager and responsible pharmacist at the Kalafong Tertiary Hospital in Gauteng, where he leads one of the busiest public sector pharmacies in the province. He's passionate about improving patient access to care, and he is the creator of the Skip the Queue, a digital solution that allows patients to pre-book chronic medication collections, reducing their waiting times to under 15 minutes. Under his leadership, the pharmacy has achieved significant service delivery improvements, introduced an innovative patient flow system, and maintained medicine availability above 96%. Bandela holds a Bachelor of Pharmacy from the University of Witwatersrand, a postgraduate diploma in cosmetic formulation from Northwest University, and is pursuing a Master's of Pharmacy in Pharmacoeconomics at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. His research focuses on the budget impact of treating extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis with advanced antibiotic regimens. In 2024, he was appointed Vice Chairperson of the Southern Gauteng branch of the South African Association of Hospital and Institutional Pharmacists, and he received the Best Manager Award at Kalafong Provincial Tertiary Hospital's Excellence Awards. He's recognized for blending technology with pharmacy practice. Bandela continues to advocate for innovative, patient-centered healthcare solutions that improve outcomes and efficiency in the South African public health system. So thank you, Bandela, and you can proceed with your presentation about hospital and institutional pharmacy.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. Greetings, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank SAPC, PSSA, and also NTOH and other stakeholders for organizing this wonderful webinar. So I'm Bandela Mkokli, currently a pharmacy manager and a responsible pharmacist at Kalafong Tertiary Hospital. Kalafong is in Atteridgeville, just on the Proteria west side. Next slide, please. So the question is there anything else hospital pharmacists do beyond just dispensing? So when they think about a hospital pharmacist, most picture someone who's just handing out medicine. But in institutional pharmacy, that's just the beginning. So if you think of it, we're the last point of contact in most cases for the pharmacy, and we are the heartbeat of the hospital care system. So in essence, we influence outcome before the prescription is written and long after the medicine is given. Next slide. So I'll be covering a few parts that we play a key role as hospital pharmacists, particularly in a tertiary hospital. So one of those roles is in clinical and patient care support, where we are part of ward rounds and case discussion with doctors, nurses, and dietitians. Remember now, currently, all the TPNs are procured by the pharmacy and kept at the pharmacy and then gets distributed to the dietitians. That's why we also involved in discussion with the dietitians. So we also provide therapeutic drug monitoring, also involved in antimicrobial stewardship and adjusting doses for patients with kidney problems, give guidance on complex IV mixtures. And we also counsel patients with complicated regimens, such as whether it's TB, whether it's HIV or oncology. So other than that, we're also involved in medicine supply chain and stewardship. So here, we manage forecasting, procurement, and contract management, and all the buyouts. At the moment, when you're procuring drugs, there are two ways to procure it. You procure it via the medical savings depot. Those are the items that have been contracted by the National Department of Health. And if the product is not on the contract, then you have to do what we call a buyout. A buyout is basically you follow all the regulations of the supply chain, whereby now you have to buy the product directly from the company. But for you to do that, you have to do all these things of getting 3 codes, make sure the company is on CSD and stuff. So you need to be aware and be acquainted with all the supply chain regulations and also the PFMA Act. So in that process, at the same time, we have to monitor stock closely to avoid any shortages and wastage. For example, on our side, we have been given a target that we have to keep our medicine availability at 96% all the time. So we need to have a demand plan and make sure that our demand plans meets the demands of the hospital. And then we plan ahead properly and follow up relentlessly and ensure that our procurement tools are optimized properly. Next slide. So when it comes to supply chain and financial governance, I've been fortunate enough to be part of what we call a QAC, and some of the pharmacists are also part of that. So QAC is mainly a coalition adjudication committees where you help oversee the procurement processes and also to ensure that bidders that are bidding for the hospital, not only for the pharmacy, but for the hospital entirely, comply with the PFMA Act and also supply chain regulation. So the intention of this committee and the role that you play also as a pharmacist, you protect the public funds by ensuring that supplier selection is transparent, fair, and fully compliant. So, for example, if you are a member of the committee, you will be able to, let's say, prevent any non-compliant suppliers from entering high-value contracts of the hospital. So, in essence, we'll be safeguarding the hospital resources and ensuring that patients get quality products on time. Next slide. So we're also involved in data governance and information integrity. So in essence, here you will be working hand in hand. Remember now, pharmacy is also feeding into the hospital information system, which is called HIS. So in essence, all the patients that are coming to pharmacy, all the prescriptions that will be dispensing, and all the products that will be dispensing, and also you have to feed the system with the expired stock, with short-dated stock, with items that have been out of stock for that period, and so all that data it's fed into this system so that to ensure that the hospital is running optimally all the time. So when you are part of this data verification, basically you ensure that the hospital data also complies with the National Health Act. So in essence, when you work, the role there will be mainly to verify the source documents that if they match what is captured in what we call the HIS and other patient record. So we make sure the data is relevant, timely, accessible, consistent, reliable, complete, and accurate all the time, because poor data can lead to poor decisions. So that's the main role that we'll be playing in the DHIS. And then another role we're playing there is education, mentorship, and leadership. So we are mainly involved also in training interns, guiding community service pharmacists and learner assistants. Even though now the program has been updated, and so learner assistants are no longer coming to us at a full-time basis, but we still play a huge role as a preceptors. We're no longer tutors per se, but we're preceptors now. And then another thing that we do, we lead policy compliance and also prepare for audits and implement the SOPs. For example, for Gauteng Health, the SOPs are centralized in the head office. So there's one SOP that is used across all the hospitals, which is prepared by the central office. So in a sense of mentorship, education, I had a privilege recently of having about 25 learners that were coming from the Department of Agriculture through a program called NARISEC. NARISEC is a program where they go around the whole of Gauteng province and get students from the rural areas and upskill them. So it just opens a pathway for them to join the pharmacy profession and also upskilling them. So it's not only that, we also involved in technology and in innovation. So we're not just medicine experts, we're also problem solvers. So because our hospitals, most of them are running with limited resources. So somehow, somewhere, you have to improvise and try by all means to capitalize on the resources that you have to make sure that you do your best for the patient. For example, we recently, as an institution, we've developed what we call a Skip the Queue, which is in essence an app where patients are able to book in advance and inform us in advance that they will be collecting their medication. So what it does, it just reduces the waiting time for the patient. So instead of them coming to the hospital and spend hours and hours waiting in the queue for their medication, they just inform us in advance that they'll be coming on a specific day, and then we try by all means to prepare that medication. So by the time they come, they can collect it within 15 minutes. So we also built dashboards and electronic management tools just to improve transparency and also effective management of stock. So, for example, with our Skip the Queue right now, it's something that is started around about last year in March, and so far it has served over 6,000 chronic patients. And because some of the patients, they don't qualify for CCMDD, which is another program that is run by the government in collaboration with the private sector. But the challenge with CCMD is that, particularly for tertiary institution and also for central hospital, the formula is quite limited. So some of the patients who are attending multiple clinics at our tertiary institution and do not qualify for CCMDD. So we normally run things like Skip the Queue to make sure those patients also can experience a faster service, which they would have experienced if they were part of CCMD. So in closing up, we as institution pharmacists, problem solvers, innovators, and patient advocates, and then dispensing is part of what we do, but our value extends far, far beyond the counter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandela. And I have to agree. I think if you need somebody to solve a problem, you ask a hospital pharmacist, especially one that's working in limited resource settings. So we finally resolved our technical difficulty, and Prof. Natalie Shellack is in the webinar, and she will be able to present now on pharmacists and academia. I'm not going to read her bio again since I have read it. We're just quickly moving the slides to the correct spot. And then Prof. Natalie, over to you, and thanks for being here.
Good evening, colleagues, and apologies, for the technical difficulties, and thank you for hosting me. So yes, thank you for the warm welcome and allowing us for the privilege to share our different journeys today. I always begin many of the presentations with figures from Greek mythology, especially Pandora. Many of you may recall the story. Pandora was very curious and very courageous. She opened a mysterious box and she released all manners of challenges and troubles into the world. But amidst the turmoil, one thing remained, and that's hope, and that was securely preserved inside. So in the context of pharmacy profession, we always view it from a very limited vantage point. We think about the pharmacist behind the counter, dispensing medications, offering advice, almost also a mediator between a prescriber and a patient. But the truth is, much like Pandora's box, pharmacy is much more complex and also often much more challenging. And in the past few years, our profession has faced its share of trials, from regulatory hurdles for specializations, evolving healthcare demands, AI, a lot of public misconceptions around COVID, in that time, a lot of scientific scrutiny. So each of these challenges may feel like Pandora's box, unleashing a lot of certainty. But within academia and within clinical pharmacy and even in the editorial world, there's always the hope for patient-centered care, which at the heart of pharmacy remains, that we want to have the most positive health outcome. And so today I just want to move a little bit about beyond the counter. So to look at many of the unmasked, many of the unforced, unseen roles that pharmacists can play, from educator, researcher, policy shaper to clinical consultant. So even when we are confronted with the challenges of change, pharmacists are, and as previous speakers have said, and always have been, keepers of hope for the future of healthcare. Next slide, please. Okay, so I invite you also to just begin with the story of the jumping mouse. It's a tale from Native American tradition. So it's a Native American legend, and it's often attributed to the plains of the Indian traditions, and it's well known through oral retellings, and many of the stories that we have, are just stories that's retold from one generation to another. But this story always sticks with me because it's a story about personal transformation, and it's from a book called 7 Arrows. But in this story, it's a very humble mouse that's stirred by this mysterious sound of a very mighty river, and he leaves the safety of his home even after many of the other mice now tells him he's just crazy for hearing this river because he's never seen a river. So on this journey, he repeatedly gives up many comforts to just find parts of himself, but to help others. So he removes the mask of almost of limitation and fear, and he goes through a buffalo and a wolf. So many of the sacrifice and courage, the mouse is now ultimately transformed into an eagle to see the entire landscape with wisdom and destiny. So I think as we reflect on Pharmacy Month and many of the different roles that the pharmacist can play, this story reminds me, because it's a powerful metaphor for the pharmacy profession. Like the jumping mouse, many pharmacists do hear a mighty river in our evolving, changing landscapes. So it's a call to something that's much greater than the familiar boundaries of the counter. So responding to that call means maybe stepping into roles that is uncomfortable, for example, beyond dispensing. For me, as an academic, as an educator, but sometimes also as an advocate, researcher, also policy influencers and guardians, ultimately, of public health. And each of these challenges we face, new regulations, evolving diseases, even AI changes, is another leap. And you see in this picture, he's talking to the frog. Frog is seen as a transformative character in many of these folk tales. Look at the interconnectedness of our work. So even though I work in a different field than many of our other speakers, ultimately we have a broad perspective to improve the health of not just the individual health, but for South Africa and the well-being of an entire community. Next slide, please. So when we look at the pharmacy beyond the dispensary, these are just pictures that many students drew. So it's about really talking about removing masks. So many in this picture, you'll, for example, see these are some of the pictures that they drew, many of the students drew, about what is the true scope of what pharmacists do. So many see a pharmacist as just a dispenser. So this is also a mask that we must remove, because a pharmacist remains almost like a primary care of contact, someone who manages chronic diseases, treating minor ailments or immunizations. And many of this is also involved in academia, because remember, we have to teach these students that are going to look at these different minor ailments and also practice PCDT. You can just press the next button. But even if we look in a hospital setting, so you'll see these are almost like hospital setting places where it's almost as if the pharmacist can be seen as locked away in a dispensary. But again, beyond that, masks or clinical pharmacists or just pharmacists that lies and that are bedside advocates. They ensure that there's the best medicines through antimicrobial stewardship, reconciliation, participation in ward rounds, and they safeguard lives, but in real time. So in other words, at that moment. And within education and even within academia, it can almost be seen as if we are just living in this ivory tower, right? We are really disconnected from reality. But many of the academics have got a lot of skin in the game. In other words, we still go on these rounds. And many of the educators and academics and people shaping policy shape the next generation of pharmacists. You can go to the next, press the next button. So in all of this, you can see there has to be education. In other words, you have to speak to other people to influence how policy can change. So in all of this, even in this last slide, you can see it's this person that's just putting this cloak, and then you've got lots of people saying yes. But even as the editor of the South African Pharmacy Journal, and even in my own experience with the SAPJ, you can move to the next slide. It seems as though there's a lot of dry administration, but a lot of this education reaches people in very rural places. In other words, in rural places through publishing and research ethics, we as pharmacists are the gatekeepers of truth in science, really making sure that whatever reaches the practitioners and the patients are safe and effective. And that really is a big role that academics and even people in science and even in the editorial board plays. So the next slide is really just the students' dilemma, and even young pharmacists' dilemma is really what is the career path visibility. So one of the many truths that I've learned in life is that we often make decisions based on what we see. But I can guarantee you there's a lot more than what you cannot see. Many of our B-Pharm graduates look ahead. They believe that the options are just limited to mainly two paths, mainly community pharmacy, hospital pharmacy, or even sometimes, industrial pharmacy. And these are vital and rewarding careers, but they really are not the whole picture, not by far. It's almost like when you stand in a room and you'll see many of these drawings by the students, and you've got a curtain that's drawn, you might assume that when the curtain is drawn, that's the only space that you see until someone draws away the curtains, as you can see in the second and the third part of these cartoons. So suddenly there's an entire landscape. Pharmacists can be editors. They can really shape the scientific dialogue of many of the work that we do. They can be policy advisors. They can influence national healthcare decisions, like working on the Pharmacy Council or even in the National Department of Health. They can be researchers. They can uncover evidence that changes people's lives. And even in clinical specialists, like areas like antimicrobial resistance, really fighting global health threats at the front line. So every time when we reveal hidden roles like what we are doing tonight, and I want to thank everyone involved here, we are empowering students and colleagues to make informed but otherwise brave career choices that does not always seem aligned with what we know or what is familiar, but at the heart of all of this is the needs of our society. So if you are honest with yourself tonight, how many of you knew that pharmacists could be editors, policy advisors, researchers, or even specialists, and so many more roles? So don't think because you can only see certain paths, you only have to choose certain paths. In pharmacy and in the youth, you have the power to shape the future of pharmacy. Next slide, please. This is my second last slide. So even, in this story, this Native American tale, this mouse now becomes an eagle. And Ian Proudfoot in the Echo community said, often the vulnerability of educators, in other words, opens the space for allowing people to drop their masks. So as an academic, I often tell my students, well, you know what, I'm not completely sure about this, But I'll get back to you, just being vulnerable, allowing them to also fill the spaces of science and then to become the eagles as you look at them. So as we talk about the exploring lesser known pharmacy roles, what we're really talking about is also removing different masks. The masks of your own limitations, the masks of narrow career thinking, also the mask that hides the truth of how vast and dynamic the profession of pharmacy really is. Think about how I started this presentation about the jumping mouse. You may be in a very safe and familiar surrounding until you hear something, a very mighty river, and this may shock your perception of what is possible. But in this folktale, it really nudged this mouse to take a leap, to step beyond your comfort zone. And I really believe that many of the opportunities in pharmacy have not even been created, but we depend on our youth. You know, the same way we depend on educators, mentors, and leaders to be vulnerable, to share the whole picture, but to uncover unconventional paths. And in authenticity and leadership, it's also about what is possible. So, and in pharmacy, that means that we sometimes have to pull back the curtains on what we often think remains hidden. So, for example, I work now in a school where there's a lot of medicine, and almost everything that isn't necessarily related to pharmacy, but I advocate for pharmacists and the powerful role that they play as global health advocates. And when we take off many of these masks, possibility takes shape. So the very last slide, please. So just when you look at Pandora, she looks very happy at this moment, but when she opened and she unleashed all of the evils and the miseries into the world, sickness and death and sorrow and strife and greed and many of the other troubles, she closed the door, but then when hope remained, it's meant to, the story is always meant to explain why the world and pharmacy can be filled with hardships. And many things, for example, where we think, you know, we can't find jobs and so on. But it is important for us to remain resilient in the face of adversity. And for many of our students or even early career pharmacists and for colleagues at every stage, and the hope for the pharmacy profession is vast, it's adaptable, and there's a lot of opportunities that wait to be uncovered. So the journey always from when you are still a mouse and you are just with your journey until you become an eagle is always ongoing. But we need to continue sharing stories like we are doing tonight and to keep hope alive for the next generation and to always remind ourselves and others that there is a lot more to pharmacy than meets the eye. Thank you, colleagues, and also thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Prof. Natalie. It's all not, but there's actually so much more that you guys do. And we're always thankful that you actually do train us properly. When we have to do calculations that could have catastrophic side effects if it's wrong, we're always thankful that our lecturers were strict and trained us well on calculations. So we're now going to move on to community pharmacy, and Mrs. Shushu Rihanzu Comfort Mangwane is going to talk to us, and she's a pharmacy owner at Spruit Pharmacy. She's got over 25 years of experience as a pharmacist and 8 years experience in independent pharmacy. She holds an MSc degree in pharmacology with the University of Pretoria. During her years of practice, she has acquired several certificates, including the PMAR, Pharmacist-Initiated Management of Antiretroviral Therapy, which is unfortunately still embroiled in a legal battle. And as ICPA Director, she is passionate in pursuing a holistic approach to push the healthcare system in the right direction in collaboration with other stakeholders for community interest. She's an advocate for sustainable development and growth of independent pharmacies in today's rapidly changing healthcare environment and technology. Thank you so much for joining us, Sushu, and over to you.
Thank you, Andre. I forgive you for butchering my surname. And good evening, colleagues. And thank you, Andre, again for the warm introduction. Let me further convey my sincere thanks to ICPA for the support and guidance, and to SAPC, to PSSA, National Department of Health, and other stakeholders. Thank you for organizing this informative webinar. Next slide, please. Community pharmacists as healthcare professionals play a vital role within the healthcare system. The theme for Pharmacy Month, Think Health, Think Pharmacy, one profession, many roles, is a true definition of community pharmacists, as they offer various services that can enhance public health and community well-being. Community pharmacist has extensive knowledge and expertise. We are trained to triage and treat or refer the conditions appropriately for patients who need further medical attention to other healthcare providers. And due to their high accessibility, convenient operating hours, and location, community pharmacists are ideal places for provision of primary health care through pharmacy clinic services. Next slide, please. Yes, you will recall, colleagues, that during COVID-19 pandemic, as healthcare providers, we had to expand our roles and take on more responsibilities. Community pharmacies can offer a number of services to the society, including but not limited to preventative health care that aims to minimize disease from occurring. And by minimizing disease from occurring, that is basically primary prevention, and also by reducing progression of diseases, and that is secondary prevention, and decrease the impact of disease if it occurs, and that is tertiary prevention. And the last one on that slide, of course, it's self-explanatory, saves cost. Next slide, please. That is the graph basically showing the essential services, the advanced services, the local enhanced services. So basically, those are the known ones, the traditional dispensing, that's what we do on a daily basis. The ADR intervention, and of course the PIT, the pharmacist-initiated therapy. And on the advanced services, that is not what we do. That is not what we do mostly on a daily basis, but most of the things we do, that is medicine utilization review, new medicine services, adherence programs, drug treatment plans. And the last one on the far right, that is the NCD screening, family planning, and sexual health, EPI and immunization, lifestyle modification, HCT, PrEP, PEP, and ART, and of course, specialization. Next slide, please. More services community pharmacists can offer that includes screening, and that is screening for chronic diseases such as hypertension, diabetes, hypercholesterol, HIV infection. And many community pharmacies provide vaccinations for influenza, for shingles, for pneumonia, and child immunization. Community pharmacists offer advice on lifestyle modification, including diet and exercise, which help individuals manage and reduce the risk of chronic diseases by monitoring health status, providing education, and coordinating care with other healthcare professionals. And community pharmacists often provide resources and counseling to assist individuals quit smoking, which significantly improve healthcare outcomes. Next slide, please. However, as community pharmacists, we have challenges and barriers that we experience on a daily basis. The first one listed on the slide, the lack of adequate reimbursement. Some professionals might feel that they do not need to perform the services because there won't be any reimbursement. And also lack of training and staff shortages. You might want to assist the patient, however, but due to staff shortages, you find yourself in a predicament where you are unable to do some of these services. And also failure to standardize the service procedures and content of related documents and how to act on results and manage disease state. And also we are faced with a lack of space in the pharmacy. I can give an example of mine as well. My pharmacy it's a very small shop. As such, I am limited to do most of the services because of limited space. Next slide, please. And the recommendation there we see, we see improved quality of life. Yes, recommendations and conclusion. Community pharmacists should consider providing some or all of the services in the pharmacies. And clinical preventative services offer opportunity to improve the health of our communities. And then, as mentioned before, also it decreases healthcare costs and improve quality of life, and preventable death can be averted. In closing, let me say overall the healthcare landscape is changing, colleagues, and pharmacists as healthcare providers are perfectly positioned to make a significant contribution to primary healthcare and preventative patient care. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. We will take questions at the end of presenters. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Shushu. And once again, I do apologize for butchering your surname. And I have to say, you know, when I was young and I was a student, I worked my hours to train during my student years in an independent community pharmacy, and I really, really enjoyed it. Before I found my other career paths, I was convinced I'm going to become a community pharmacist owner. I really enjoyed it. I think you guys, in some ways, get the best of the profession, but also in some ways the worst. Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Miss Mandi Bembe, and she's going to give us a little bit of a unexpected career path you can take. And I think this is one of the ones that many people might not know about. Mandi is a results-driven, multifaceted pharmacist with over 20 years' experience in the different sectors of pharmacy. She has extensive experience in regulation, policy making, leadership, as well as strategy development and implementation. Her competencies include strategic thinking, resource management, stakeholder coordination, sound judgment, and management excellence. Her experience in the private sector spans through the whole institutional and community pharmacy categories. Mandi is currently heading the National Department of Health Licensing Subdirectorate and is responsible for licensing of pharmacy premises, processing of dispensing and yellow fever license applications, and private nurse permits. Her unit also plays a pivotal role in the regulation of the pharmaceutical environment. Mandi co-developed the government policy on the mechanism for approval of COVID-19 vaccination sites and the development of minimum standards for vaccination sites and services. Mandi was also a project lead in the development on the policy on nurse prescribing in the public sector. Thank you, Mandi. Over to you.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to partake in this very important day, which is the launch of Pharmacy Month. I remember many, many years ago when it was Pharmacy Week back then, was launched. I was doing my community service, and it was such a great thing to be able to showcase what we as pharmacists can do. Having listened to all of the presenters, I'm reminded of the fact that as human beings, we think or we dream in pictures. And at times when we look at pharmacy, most of the pictures that are out there are those of pharmacists dispensing. And it takes me back to my time at university when I was doing my second year and I was thinking, I don't think this is the career for me. But of course, because at home I was taught to finish what I start, I had to stay on. And it was only until fourth year that a picture of what professional or what I wanted to look like when I was much older in my career looked like. A pharmacist walking into our fourth year class in her heels and pulling her laptop, and she introduces herself and she says, Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dina van den Berg and I'm a pharmacist. And I thought, no way, a pharmacist walking around looking like this. This is definitely not what I thought pharmacists do. I thought we're behind the counter all the time. I mean, back then, the counters were even long and pharmacists were behind, these windows and these shelves and really had very little access to people. And for the first time in my life, I got to see one part of pharmacy that I really had no idea existed. And I think my whole point today is to share a bit of that, because it was from that experience that what followed became what is my career at this particular moment. And again, just to introduce myself, my name is Mandi Pembe, and I'm at the National Department of Health. We can move on to the next slide. I'm really just going to be covering the introduction of National Department of Health, the involvement of pharmacists in the National Department of Health in terms of selection, procurement, oversight, prescribing, dispensing, and the use of medicines. And of course, as previously said, the question and answers will be right at the end. Thank you. The next slide, please. Firstly, at the National Department of Health, our vision is to ensure a long and healthy life for all South Africans. And our mission is to improve the health status through prevention of illness and the promotion of healthy lifestyles. We focus on access, equity, efficiency, quality, and sustainability. And when we do this, we have to link into the National Development Plan's 2030 vision, which talks to ensuring that there's an overarching health vision, which is for a health system that works for everyone, and it yields positive outcomes and is accessible by 2030. Overarching this universal health coverage in terms of the NDP 2030. And I think as pharmacists, we can see ourselves in all of these health objectives of increasing life expectancy, of having an HIV-free generation, preventing of TB and the cure of TB, and many other mechanisms. Primary health care, at some point, we did not really think that maybe pharmacists were actually right at the center of primary health care. And through some of the processes that have happened, with COVID-19 being one of our key learning areas, we got to really understand that as pharmacists, we are the first point of care. And at the National Department of Health, we can move to the next slide. We've got the key functions of ensuring that policy and strategy development are in place, that there's health systems oversight, disease prevention and health promotion is in place, quality improvements and service delivery, national health insurance, research and development support. Of course, what goes through all of these is ensuring that there's good governance. Sitting at a national level, one has to think about making sure that the patient or the person who's accessing our health service does so equitably in the different areas. At all times, we are there to ensure that we support our provincial counterparts. We are there to support our private health providers, all the different categories of pharmacies. And one of the things that I've found most interesting and funny enough, I must confess that pharmacy practice and the legislation was not particularly one of my favorite subjects. And I have found myself having to sit and weave through different legislation to enable access to health services by our patients, in particular pharmaceutical services. And indeed, it is true that as pharmacists, we are people who are problem solvers. We are teachers. We are policy makers. We are healers. You know, we put on so many different hats. And if we could understand how much of a big role we play in the strategy development and policy making, I think we would really, really find quite a lot of satisfaction. Because whether it's in education and we are talking about a new caliber or a new cadre of personnel in the pharmacy space, at National Department, we have to be involved. If we're talking about legislation that talks to the different specialities in pharmacy, we have to be there, and we have to try and make sure that there is equitable access. What we do in the state, how can we ensure that some private practice also gets access to some of those services? We can move on to the next slide. Of course, in the overview, one of the things in the directorate that I am in, and I didn't want to really go into my directorate because at National Department, it really is not just the Affordable Medicines Directorate that has pharmacists. We have programs that are looking at ensuring that there are certain disease conditions that are handled that have pharmacists in them. And just as an overview, we look at the fact that the selection of medicines and medical products, contracting, supply chain, contract management, and rational use, and overarching the enablers or the support or the governance, workforce management. And you won't believe when it comes to workforce management, at no point did I ever think at some point in my career I would find myself seconded to human resources, assisting in terms of ensuring that community service pharmacists have places to be allocated, finding myself looking through legislation and saying, what provision can we use to ensure that it's not only the state that can accommodate community service pharmacists, but that they can be afforded an opportunity even with the partners of the state in terms of community pharmacies. And so when you sit at a national level, you have to be looking right through the different sectors. Academia is involved in the allocation of community service pharmacists, for example. Of course, pivotal is ensuring that there's financial management, that budget allocation, which is why the state will do the transversal contracts on behalf of the provinces so that we are able to get the lower prices for the medicines, which then ensures that the patient at the end does not have to pay as much as they maybe would if they're going into private healthcare. Next slide, please. So what I decided to do is just to take some elements in terms of the areas of involvement where pharmacists can be involved on a national government level. And that's medicine selection. And I'll talk to some of what my colleagues do. And of course, this presentation really had a lot of inputs from some of the colleagues that I work with, from HR right through to my teammates in sector-wide procurement, in order to assist, because as I say, it's not just the world of licensing, which is where I am. So medicine selection, standard treatment guidelines, contracting, procurement, inventory management, prescribing, dispensing, and use, as well as logistics. And some positions that are held by pharmacists at the National Department of Health level is, we know that our Deputy Director General in Health Regulation is a pharmacist. We've got chief directors who are pharmacist directors, senior pharmacy policy specialists who are equivalent to deputy directors, as well as pharmaceutical policy specialists. The next slide, please. On the level of medicine selection, which is how I try to just break this down in terms of the roles that pharmacists can play, we've got the Essential Drugs Program, which aims to ensure that affordable, good quality essential medicines are available at all times in adequate amounts. This is a big team that makes sure that the citizens of South Africa get access to the medicines, which are essential medicines. From the EDP comes what we call the Essential Medicines List and the Standard Treatment Guidelines, and they provide this line of what should happen in terms of a patient who presents, let's say, with a high blood pressure. How does that patient get treated? It is like a policy that really assists the nurses at the primary healthcare level, the different levels of care, in actual fact, not just for nurses, to know how to go about. And in my position at National Department, we then try to see, okay, how do we ensure that, let's say, private sector, where there are organizations which would be designated as health rendering, are able to access these essential medicines list and standard treatment guidelines. And there are some permits and licenses that we issue to say there are some key conditions which the country needs for us to all make sure we tackle together. And so, for example, immunization services. And so we then allow for private nurse practitioners to obtain certain permits to be able to provide immunization services. And this is how, for example, the primary care drug therapy or PCDT permits were then enabled for pharmacists, because again, we said, but a pharmacist who's the first point of care of a patient must also be able to diagnose and prescribe medicines for certain conditions. And again, it's going into the SDGs and EML and saying, what can we come out? What can we bring out of there, which is essential for the country, where we all need to partner as private and public in order to enable access to pharmaceutical services and better health outcomes at the end. As I said, in the NDP, we want to ensure that our the life expectancy increases to 70 years, as opposed, I think it's at around 64 years at this point in time. And so we cannot only tackle what happens in public sector, but we have to ensure that, especially with NHI coming, that everything is really aligned. So that's the team that looks at medicine selection. Contracting, which is looking at procurement. These are the guys who ensure that the contracting takes place to ensure affordable medicines, that we've got reliable suppliers, and that contracts are awarded timely and efficiently. And as I said, this transversal pharmaceutical contracts is a mechanism where we're saying these are the what we think we will be requiring as a state. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. And then making sure that we have that supply and that would be able to supply those particular medicines. All of these processes do have this governance element, which is important. There are ministerial approved committees that form part of what happens. We can go on to the oversight, which is around contract management. So after the pre-award process is handled by the contracting team, and of course we have to ensure that there's separation and segregation of duties in order to not overlap. And this team of people will be looking at post-award processes, contract management, supply performance monitoring, sourcing in a case. So let's say a particular supplier cannot provide for those medicines. And then there's the mechanisms and their processes which are out in the public domain in terms of what is happening, who has a contract to supply what on the Department of Health's website. We can move to the next one. Of course, in that is, well, this is my home, which is licensing and regulation. And what we want to ensure is that the people and the places that handle medicines are appropriately licensed. And so there are different licenses that we issue, from pharmacy licenses in the different categories. We look at the need, whereas we work with the different stakeholders such as the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority and South African Pharmacy Council. All of what we do is legislated, and so we would look at what is the regulatory provisions, and we have all these stakeholder engagements to ensure that things are done better. You can move on to the next slide. Again, in the part of the prescribing, dispensing, and use in National Department of Health, we've got the Directorate of Pharmaceutical Economic Evaluations. And this is the team that looks at setting what the dispensing fees are, looking at single exit price adjustments, and really the impact is to ensure that the pharmaceutical policy decisions are evidence-based, affordable, and equitable, and that they support the sustainable delivery of medicines within South Africa. So they are really looking at the economics. You know, whenever we have to publish some regulations or legislation, we have to do socio-economic impact assessments, which is something I never thought as pharmacists we would really be looking at, you know, and we have to submit that to say this is what we think would be the economic impact of what is done. And this is part of what the PEE directorate would do when it comes to the setting dispensing fees and SEPs, etc. Thank you. We can move on to the next slide. Again, other stakeholders in the National Department of Health, we've got other programs looking at, particularly, as I said, remember, we're looking at rational use, we're looking at disease prevention, we're looking at managing and reducing communicable diseases. So there are programs which are really looking at the particular areas within the department. I've mentioned just a few, for example, the EPI, there's maternal and child health, primary health care, hospital services, child and youth health, and other public entities which are in partnership with the Department of Health. There's the Council for Medical Schemes, National Health Laboratory Services, the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, the Office of Health Standards Compliance. We're working quite a lot with OHSC in terms of making sure that the different health providers have standards that they are that they need to meet in their practices, whether it's dispensing doctors or permit holders, etc. And as pharmacists, we don't really think that that would be an area we work in. But if somebody is going to inspect your pharmacy, your space of work, it's important for you to have a say. And what I did learn many years ago was that when I worked for a hospital group and pharmacies were placed in some corners somewhere, was that you actually have to put your hand up. You have to make a noise, because at the end of the day, the pharmacy is in some small corner in the hospital and nobody has thought of it. And so we made it a rule to say that there is no pharmacy that will be in a new hospital without the involvement of pharmacists. And it is that I want to leave as a message to us, to say it is us who can actually make sure that we push forward and we put our expertise and our knowledge out there so that people can know that we are really much more than pill dispensers, if for a lack of a better word. I think I'm on to my second last slide now. Just in line with today's or with the Pharmacy Month theme, one profession, many roles. In the National Department, there's central role in terms of policies, there's medicine value chain, there's primary care. We're in the space of national health insurance, and there's so much that is out there that pharmacists can bring their expertise in: clinic level support, emergency, public health response, education and prevention, and clinical governance. And I can say really one of the very important things is that we need to keep up to date with what happens. Policies are made. Every time a policy is made, it is put out for comment, and for lengthy periods of time, 90 days. And it affects us as pharmacies. And it's not just about looking at things that have to do with pharmacy only, because ultimately it does come back to us as pharmacies. And as my parting note, I just want to say that as pharmacists at the National Department of Health, we really play a diverse and impactful role. It spans from policy making, regulatory work, vaccine management, you name it. As I said, at no point did I ever think I would be sitting and talking about human resources and making sure that we find a way to enable pharmacists to be able to move ahead. And this embodies the spirit of this pharmacy month, that is think health, think pharmacy, one profession, many roles. And we as pharmacists have to first recognize that we are versatile healthcare leaders. We are leaders in the healthcare space. And that we have to emphasize that pharmacy is not just about dispensing medicines. We are the shapers of health. We are the resilient part of many systems. If we looked at exactly what happened with COVID-19, pharmacy was at the center. There is no hospital that can happen without a pharmacy. There is no community pharmacy without the medicines and a pharmacist in it. There are so many different areas. In academia, we have to teach pharmacists to get them out there. So we are responsible for our community well-being. And with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Mandy. And I want to say, I don't know how many of you were sitting here tonight before this time thought maybe you could become the Deputy Director General of Health, or even the Director General of Health in the National Department of Health. Think about that. That's one of the career options many of us never considered. So we're now moving on to our last speaker for tonight, and this is Ms. Gamuchi Rai, and she is a student. And I want to ask, do you think you'll become the next Minister of Health, maybe? So Ms. Gamuchi Rai is a third-year pharmacy student at Nelson Mandela University in Gqeberha. She's a 2023 graduate of the Leaders for Change program and has served as a class representative from 2023 to 2024. She held the role of Public Relations Officer for the Port Elizabeth Pharmaceutical Students Association during the 2022-2023 term and was elected as their chairperson for the 2023-2024 term. She served as a conference convener from the 69th Annual Conference of the South African Pharmaceutical Students Federation that was held in January 2025 in Gqeberha, and is also the SAPSAF contact person for the 2024-2025 term. A committed and dynamic leader, Gamuchi Rai is especially skilled in public relations, an asset that continues to shape her impactful journey in student leadership and professional development. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. It's a privilege to be part of this webinar and to speak after hearing so many incredible professions across the pharmacy landscape. The theme, Think Health, Think Pharmacy, One Profession, Many Roles, couldn't be more fitting, especially for someone like me, still trying to figure out where I fit in. Next, please. So listening to today's presentation showed me how diverse and impactful pharmacy is, with roles in many sectors like clinical pharmacy, industry, academia, and regulation, each offering unique and challenging and rewards. So as a student, choosing a career path can feel overwhelming, and sometimes you have to ask yourself some questions before you choose the path that you want. What kind of impact do you want to make? What environment do you want to work in? Where can I make the greatest impact based on my strengths? What energizes me the most? Is it patient counseling? Is it lab work? Is it teaching, or it's research? And before everything, what was the reason I had before I chose pharmacy? Was it the big paycheck that you heard about, or you want to make a change? Next, please. What I've come to appreciate is that pharmacy isn't just a profession. It is a profession of many roles. And as a student, we often think first community pharmacy or hospital pharmacy. But through webinars, conferences, and symposium, I've learned that it is more than that. It is many roles. And we have many sectors like clinical pharmacy, regulatory affairs, research and academia, industrial pharmacy, public health and policy, pharmaceutical marketing and sales, and so much more that is yet to be discovered. Next, please. So as a student, I have come up with what I call the 5 pillars of considerations before choosing my path. So I have growth, passion, purpose, balance, and representation. So I'm going to explain one by one. So growth, I want to be in a space where I constantly learn, where I'm given the platform to evolve, and where I feel challenged. With passion, I want to choose a path where my strengths and interests align, whether it's in communication, innovation, or advocacy. And then with purpose, I want to be in a profession that makes a real difference in people's health and lives. And then with balance, like many students, I often think about future work and life balance and long term career stability. And then lastly, representation. I also want to see students and people like me in these roles, diverse voices and paths that shows that everything is possible. I think next slide. So while I might not know exactly which role I'm going to step into yet, I do know this. Pharmacy is a profession of possibilities. And thanks to what I've learned today and what I've been learning, I am more than confident to know that wherever I land, I'll be part of something meaningful. And as the Pharmacy Month theme reminds us, one health, one pharmacy. Think health, think pharmacy, one profession, many roles. For a student like me, it's not just a slogan, it's a promise of opportunities. And I thank you with this.
Thank you so much, Gumuchira. I really think the profession is in good hands if we have got students like you that are thinking about their career paths. And remember, we did not cover all the career paths tonight. It was just a matter of impossibility. So we do apologize to those that was not mentioned tonight, like, for instance, working in medical schemes, drug utilization review pharmacists, and all those. It was just we had to pick and choose, so we choose the main ones tonight. You're not less important. We just picked the biggest ones in groupings for tonight. So to all the youngsters out there, there's so many career paths for you. For instance, as when I was a student, I thought I'm going to do community pharmacy. Then I did my internship in private hospital, and I changed and I said I'm going to do private hospital. And guess what? I never knew I will have a post at the Pharmaceutical Society of South Africa, and that's where I am now. So sometimes your career path will also change, and that is also okay. Before we move to the questions, just a quick note, because I know there will be some questions about this. We are aware that the Pharmacy Month material is not on the website available quite yet. We received the last approval today, and I'm pretty sure by next week we will be able to circulate all the Pharmacy Month material to you. But on the slide at the moment, in the right-hand corner, you can see that just be what the poster looks like. Think health, think pharmacy. And it's got the different pharmacy main pharmacy sectors in there. And then the pamphlets will be broken down into a little bit more detail for each sector. So once again, thank you to all our speakers. I'm going to move to Q&A. I'm going to ask Natalie from Pharmacy Council to just assist me I didn't check if there is any questions yet.
Thanks, Henri. We do have one question, but as it says on the screen, if you would like to ask a question during this time, please do type it into the Q&A section. Question is, are we going to receive the slides? And the answer is yes. It will be available on the SAPC Pharmacy Month page and on the ICPA Pharmacy Month page after this webinar, so from tomorrow.
And Natalie, I also know the other question will be the recording. So the recording it's currently streamed on Pharmacy Council's YouTube channel, and that link afterwards will also be made available with the slides if there's anybody who wants to go back to it. If there's anybody who had any questions that didn't ask them tonight, they are welcome to also reach out to either ICPA, PSSA, or Pharmacy Council. If they want to ask a specific presenter a question, we can arrange for that to be answered if you don't want to ask it in a public setting tonight. I do see the time. If there isn't any questions, then I'm going to give it a moment or two. But then I just want to say thank you to everybody that joined us. I hope all of you reignited your dream of being a pharmacist and what that means for you and what role you play in your setting and in your community as a pharmacist, whatever that might be. Remember, you are important, and remember that you do make a difference. As you said, there's one question to Prof. Natalie. Prof. Natalie, there's one person asking, how can younger pharmacists get more involved in academia, particularly in bridging the link between research and clinical pharmacy, clinical practice, research, bridging the link between research and clinical practice, if you don't mind answering that.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you for the question. There are many research opportunities available through many of the universities. Pharmacy, universities that offer pharmacy and universities that doesn't offer pharmacy. And the most important is there's shadowing opportunities. So, for example, at our university, you can come and shadow. And at many of the other universities, you can also become involved in shadowing opportunities. First of all, to understand, is studying or pursuing a postgraduate degree for you or even specialization for you? That's the most important thing. So first consider, go and have a look if this is something that you want to pursue. And then, just go and look at what it is that you would like to do, which specific aspect it is, that you want to investigate. If it's cancer, look at the university that has that specific research options. Speak to a supervisor. There are many different opportunities. But Andrea, I also want to say in an informal way, many of the pharmacists that are also part of practice, that are just, working, we often have many research opportunities, in engaging in just with patients and other opportunities. That doesn't necessarily have to be so structured, but can be written and can be submitted to the journal, the SAPJ, or even if you see a trend, can be converted into research. Thanks, Andre.
Thank you so much. And yes.
I see there is another question. Can I ask, in all the webinar, what is the role of pharmacist assistants? Are they also part of these great opportunities?
So this is, I'll answer this one a little bit on behalf of the team. Pharmacist assistants are definitely also part of these great opportunities. And I actually thought about this earlier tonight. I think one thing that maybe we should do is look at doing a webinar, maybe specifically on pharmacy support personnel, especially with the changes that happened, on what is your opportunities as pharmacist assistants. I know, for instance, there's pharmacist assistants working in regulatory affairs, for instance, as regulatory assistants, just on this example. There's pharmacist assistants working in medical schemes. There's pharmacist assistants working in various other fields. So wasn't because you're not important that we didn't mention you tonight. It's just that your career paths might look slightly different, but there's many options for you guys as well. So we'll definitely look into that. You also play a very important role in all the various fields. And I think if the team agrees with me, that's something we will look into. And then we will make sure that we make something like this happen with a specific focus on pharmacy support personnel. I don't know if any of the presenters want to add to that question. You're welcome to.
Yes, may I add, Andre?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, it's Shushu here. Just one line. Let me just mention that pharmacy assistants shouldn't feel excluded. You will not go in any pharmacy without them being there. You will not go anywhere where there's a pharmacist and there is no pharmacy assistant. So they are very critical and they are very important in this field of practice. Thank you. I think it's a brilliant idea to have another webinar, including pharmacy assistants and other personnel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shushu. I saw Prof. Natalie, you wanted to add a comment, and after you, Mandy, you can also add a comment.
Yes, now all I wanted to say is, that when it comes to the health workforce, pharmacist assistants and the numbers that we have for both basic, post-basic is It is one of the most important workforce cadres that we have in pharmacy. So they have a very important role. And many of these positions or opportunities that we've mentioned, even in academia and research, is not out of reach for the support personnel. But as you've mentioned, Andre, as we are moving now to technicians and with specialization, the career in pharmacy, I can see is going to change because we are going to have new cadres of workforce, of health workforce. But it's an exciting opportunity, and I think it's important for pharmacist assistants in both of those levels to voice, how they see this changing as well, and to participate in the dialogue.
Well, thank you, Andre. I think on a National Department of Health level, one of the very important things that we had to try to ensure is that there is progression that's enabled from a pharmacist assistant to a pharmacy technician to a pharmacist. And this is why we spent many years looking at how to introduce the cadre of pharmacy technician, how to enable the pharmacists who have pharmacist assistants who have gone through the I'm going to call it the older training for lack of a better word, how they could get onto the next level and be able to really progress. I think there's also opportunities, and maybe pharmacist assistants don't know, but I'm sure that SAPRA, for example, employs some pharmacist assistants, and that even at the level of national department, there are some areas that we're looking into that we're thinking perhaps we could have pharmacist assistants handling those particular areas. And so it really does not only limit pharmacist assistants to being in the space of institutional or community pharmacy and maybe industry at times, but the whole point of creating this new qualification was to enable that we have a generalist similar to what we have for pharmacists, so that the pharmacist assistants can really have a greater role to play, not just in the community or institutional pharmacies. Already the state in itself has pharmacist assistants under indirect supervision working at the primary healthcare facilities, and we want to ensure that we enable them and we give them all the skills that they need to be able to assist in those particular services. And having worked in a rural space myself for my community service in Butterworth in the Eastern Cape, really I saw the big role that pharmacist assistants played in your community health centers, in the different levels of hospitals, in the absence of pharmacies even. So yes, indeed, I am in full agreement on having a session so that pharmacist assistants themselves can actually see how they can progress in terms of their careers. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Natty, and thank you, Mandy. I've got a question here that I can see it was specifically posted to you, Mandy. The person asks, how does one get to occupy space and add value at National Department of Health as a pharmacist? How does one get involved, and are there extra qualifications required?
So the good thing about National Department of Health positions for pharmacy policy specialists, I think I mentioned, which is usually for pharmacists the level of entry, is it's really around the experience that you have gathered. And at some point, I remember getting advice that make yourself unique in this area of space that you want to really play in. Think about it so that when they require somebody who has expertise or who has knowledge of regulatory, that is what you show yourself to have done. And there are many different ways in terms of getting involved in the space of national. Well, for one, we do advertise positions that are available. However, we are also open to, we have meetings with with people who request to have opportunities to talk to us about ideas that they may have. And sometimes, for example, if one wants to participate in CCMDD, it may not sit in my level, in my position or in my space or directorate, but we always are able to direct people to the right levels and spaces, and we take ideas. The reason we actually even have a Section 22A15 permit for immunization services for nurses and pharmacists, as well as the one for family planning, it really came from what was said to the national department in terms of what is really required out there. So we are open to, our contact details are on the website, and I'm sure they'll be shared after this webinar. However, I think you just have to be on the lookout, and whenever there's an opportunity, put your hand up. Recently, there will be call for nominations to be in different advisory committees. Don't be scared to put your hand up, because you will know what expertise you may bring to the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've then got a question that goes to Bandela, and the question is, what challenges does one face when seeking to implement such interventions as the Skip the Queue app in public institution, and are people welcoming of these innovations?
Thank you for the questions. One of the challenges that you're gonna come across is that, one, you're not gonna get the support that you might expect. When I was rolling out Skip the Queue, normally you have to ask for permission, whereby you write a motivation to the clinical manager, and then it goes to the CTO, CFO, and then CEO, and then if needs be, it might even go outside of that to the provincial office. So the angle that I took in this case was to develop Skip the Queue as a QIP, which means a quality improvement project, because at the end of the day, as a manager of the unit, I was required to reduce the waiting time. So now I developed the project as a QIP because I knew that there were going to be red flags. Remember now, our hospitals are run by politicians, and by the looks of things, politicians are more involved on what is in for them other than the patients. So most of the time, if you're coming up with a project like this and then you request financial support from them, you will hardly find it, because at the end of the day, they're interested on tendering it out so that someone out there can benefit from it. So if you are intending or you're planning to do a project like this, particularly in a public institution, just know that you need to be aware that you might have to push it and use your own resources to make sure it succeed. And until it gets to a point where it proves its value, then that's where possibly you will get the financial support. But in the beginning, it's very, very difficult to just deploy a project like this, particularly if it's not coming from the IT department, the government. I hope I've answered the question.
Thank you, Bandela. And if you want to reach out to Bandela to know more about it, you can contact us and we'll put you in contact with him. He did an excellent presentation at the SAIP conference on exactly how he did the implementation. There's a question to Marlene. Marlene, I know you answered it in the chat, but I want you to say to everybody, because I know we get this one quite a lot. And the question is, as someone who is interested in regulatory affairs, what would your advice be for me in terms of putting myself out there when applying for jobs? I've tried short courses on regulatory affairs, but I don't know if that's enough.
Thanks, Andrea. And this is also, a very good question to just be able to redirect one's career path. So the response that I put in is that regulatory involves applying knowledge from production. And what I would recommend is starting in a setting that is familiar. So preferably in production, or even a QA compliance role within a manufacturing setting, to get the practical exposure first and then grow from there. From my personal experience, my exposure in quality first helped me a lot, because you do need that quality mindset in order to be able to apply this very quickly in a regulatory setting. So regulatory is quite complex because it involves applying knowledge in a very fast-paced environment. And I think it's important to have the background and the first-hand experience of production and quality before you get into regulatory.
Thank you so much, Marlene. I know that's a very common question. I then see Glenn has posted a question that came from YouTube. And it says, good evening and thank you for the webinar. With AI being the next big thing, what is the foreseen impact to the profession? And I'm not an expert on AI. However, we have had just last week a discussion or a presentation on AI in the profession at the PSSA conference. And one of the speakers said something that I think is very true. And they said, a pharmacist will not be replaced by AI. However, you might, if you're not using AI, you will be replaced by a pharmacist who is using AI. And their suggestion was that you learn to work with AI and incorporate it to some extent into your career path and your practice, but always know that you cannot be replaced by AI as such. So I don't know if any of the other presenters want to add to that. If there is someone there, welcome to add.
Thank you. I think I'd like to add the fact that we have to embrace AI as part of, the future. However, we cannot take away from the fact that we have the brains and that AI is not always correct. And as the experts and custodians in medicines, we would be the people to ensure that the information that comes out in those AI generated systems is correct. And I think something that we do as pharmacists at times is to stand back, which is why I think I ended my presentation with saying we have to push forward. We cannot have others dictate to our profession. We are the custodians. We know what needs to happen. And so even in that and showing that we are diverse, and pharmacy personnel are actually diverse beings. And so somebody is behind AI, and we have to make sure that pharmacists are right in there. Thank you.
Thank you for that insightful comments, Mandy. I think that's very true that you've just said now. I just want to check, I'm not seeing any other questions. Is there any other of the presenters that want to add something? Natalie?
Yes. Now, Andrea, I just wanted to say, even, from an editorial perspective for AI, if you publish, it doesn't mean that you can't use AI. It's just important that you ethically mention, when you are going to use AI, if I just wear my editorial hat. And then just remember that with AI, as you've mentioned, there's different types. There's deep learning and generative AI. And even in pharmacy and in pharmacology, there's a lot of work around using AI to even discover new drug molecules. There's clinical trials for repurposed medicines that's just based on AI. So I think AI is definitely going to be here in pharmacy and in the medicines that we use, just to help us also to target new drugs and to help us to process different systems better. But it's always information that we as humans give to AI. So I think it's just important to remember that we still need to generate new information. And if you publish, remember just to declare it. But as you've mentioned, and as the other speakers have mentioned, it will always be with us. But we just have to use it ethically.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I think then we'll call it a night. I see all the questions has been answered. Oh, Marlene, sorry, you want to add?
Thanks, Andre. I'd like to just add, just from an industry perspective, because we already have regulations that are widely available in the public domain, our procedures are written. It's possible, to improve efficiencies in industry by employing some AI tools. However, it's very important to understand what are the questions that we put into these tools to generate the right responses. And in order to be able to use AI appropriately, we need to understand the requirements well. It's not just a matter of generating information because it's available out there. It's the type of questions that we put in and the type of responses that we expect that become quite important. So while it will build efficiencies, it has to be used appropriately.
Thank you so much. Once again, I just want to say a last big thank you to all our presenters tonight. Thanks for showing us all the different roles we can play. And may we have opened the curtain for so many of the youngsters, like Prof. Natalie mentioned, and have created some ideas. And I hope that one day we will have a Minister of Health in South Africa that is actually a pharmacist, and that this evening could have inspired them to become that. So once again, thanks to everybody who joined us. Thanks for all the questions. May you all enjoy Pharmacy Month next month and have some discussions with your patients where you can, or your colleagues when you're working with doctors and nurses, and say, did you know that this is the things that I can do? And educate them on one profession, many roles. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you,
good night.
everyone. Good evening.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
and good evening.